You ever wonder why some people get together and you're like, why are they together? Or maybe you might even look at some of your past relationships and you're like, I don't know why I picked that person. And you will use excuses or sort of quick definitions like, it's just love. I just fell into it. I love this. I just fell into it. It just happened. I hear this all the time. Love never just happens. You never fall into love. There's always something going on psychologically. The motivators for being with a partner are partly biological, partly psychological, and partly social. And I'm going to break down some of the big ones so that we can all understand our choices better. Um, First of all, when we use the term motivator, you know what that means. It means like it makes you do something. And a biological motivator means something physical or hormonal. I'm going to talk about pheromones in a minute. A psychological motivator is something emotional, something that you're thinking about, right? So let's start by talking about the biological motivators for love. Now, we've all heard, well, I just fell, what happened? It was just lust, it was passion. We just ended up hooking up on the first date and we were just so deeply in love. But there was probably a lot of stuff going on, and some of it might have been purely biological. For instance, let's think about it. Let's think of the purposes of sex, biological purposes of sex. Obviously, reproduction is a big one. So there's some research to show that people who are in their reproductive years have higher sex drives, want more frequent sex, maybe want a variety of partners more, depending on their wiring. And they're not consciously saying, I want to have children. That's the psychological part, because their biological urges might actually be at odds with their psychological. They might be like, no, I do not want kids until I'm well into my 30s. And there they are, 27 and pregnant, because they fell into love. Interesting enough, when a woman is ovulating during those 3 days of the month where she has what we call concealed fertility. You can't tell that she's ovulating, and sometimes she doesn't even know that she's ovulating. But they send out subtle signals to men that they're fertile that men pick up on. For instance, their voices get higher, a little higher and breathier, very Marilyn Monroe. That's one thing that happens when they're ovulating. See, I can't even like do it now because I don't ovulate anymore. So my voice is like down here. And then the other thing that they do is they move their bodies differently. Yeah, their walk actually changes. Yeah, there's a little wiggle in that walk when they're ovulating. There's been all kinds of other behavioral studies that are fascinating. Like, for instance, one study looked at college girls' cell phone records, and they determined that during the 3 days of the month when they were ovulating, they never called their fathers. Funny. So we do all kinds of things unconsciously because our biology is happening. Now, I mentioned pheromones and I want to talk about them. So when you meet somebody and you think back about like maybe the best sexual relationship you've ever had in your life, sometimes you might report, well, they just smelled so delicious. They just smelled so good. And what you're actually picking up on are the pheromones associated with immune system genes. Now, stay with me. So when two people mate and procreate, they might take brown skin from one, long legs from another, curly hair from another, freckles from another, except immune system genes. Immune system genes, which mean the diseases that you are immune to, right? Because of whatever your ancestors encountered and went into your DNA. Immune system genes combine to create a even more strong human being in offspring. And so as a result, when you meet somebody who has different immune system genes than you, they don't wear it on their face. They don't have a sign that says, my ancestors survived different diseases than you. Let's make a baby that's extra strong. There's no t-shirts for that. How it shows itself is through pheromones. And there is some research to show that people who have really different immune systems tend to have better sex, and the passion and lust lasts longer in the relationship. So that's a biological piece. Now, the other reason we have sex, for pleasure. Lots of primates use sex for all kinds of exchanges of goods and services, and so do we. And sometimes we have sex just because of pleasure. Sometimes we have sex because of hormone surges. I mentioned that earlier. And sometimes we have sex just because it's a good stress reliever, right? When you release those delicious neurohormones, oxytocin and endorphins, they're happy hormones and they suppress your stress hormones, cortisol, that you don't want to have happening too much, right? So that's an example of biological. Let's talk a little bit about, though, psychology of love, because we think about it all the time. We know that love can fulfill so many of our needs for safety and security. Um, but here's the problem: depending on our psychology, love can bring us pain or love can bring us this sense of security based on what's going on with our psychology at the moment. So, for instance, one motivating factor for finding love is simply feelings of sadness and loneliness. Now, I used to say, I remember when I was a young single woman, I used to say, you can't find anybody until you are truly sick of being single. That was my line. I didn't know the science of it back then. But if you get to a place in your life where you're really feeling so sad and you know that love and sex will provide the neurohormones to help your mental health, that will be a motivator for you to go out there and find love, right? So be aware of your own moods when you're socializing, when you're going online. This is positive or negative because sometimes we pick the wrong people just because we're sad and lonely. Well, sometimes a short term relationship can be a lovely salve, right? Everything doesn't have to last until death do us part, but it's nice to have long term committed relationships. All right, when we come back, I'm going to continue talking about the psychological motivators, and then I'll get into the social motivators, and that's pretty much everything people put on their dating app. We've been talking about the motivators for love. What causes people to pick partners, when and why? We talked about all the biological things that happen with hormones and age and immune system, pheromones, stage of life, etc. And then lots of psychological motivators. And one is identity and purpose. Some people literally don't like the identity of being single. Now, I want to stop and remind you that for the first time in American history, we actually have more unmarried adults than married adults. In 1950, about 80% of people over the age of 18 were married. Okay. So now some of these people doesn't mean they're not in relationships. They could be dating, living separately. They could be cohabitating, but they're definitely not in a traditional marriage. And they may identify on their Facebook as single if they're not married. So I want to remind people that, it is our culture, not science, that chooses what is sort of okay. And I know that so much of our culture organizes itself around couplehood. You get deals on your tax returns. People socialize. They do business as couples. I mean, I understand how you can feel like an outsider. And what's really interesting is couples self identify very easily as couples, but singles are less likely to find community, right? They're considered like somehow unchosen, and they think that themselves too. So I want to remind everybody that it is possible to live a life filled with value, with well being, with deep, secure connections and love, and still remain unmarried. This is possible. But one motivator for finding a partner is this identity, wanting to have the identity as couple. Now, another big piece in the psychology, and I know I talk about this all the time, but if you're new to the show, you should know that my area of specialty is an area of psychology called attachment theory, the ways that we attach across the lifespan. And we have a little kind of model for love in our heads, an idea of what love is. And it is partly based on the relationship we had with our mother, partly based on the relationship we had with our father. And remember, if one of those are missing, then you've got a sort of a black hole in that area. And then the relationship that you witness between the two of them. And so babies come into the world also with a genetic predisposition towards needing more care and closeness or needing more independence and separateness. And then how caregivers respond in the first, especially the first year of life when you're pre-verbal and the brain triples in size, are when you form your idea for love. So if you had a parent who picked you up and consoled you and loved you and was there and was consistent and everything was great, you're going to go out and find adult romantic partners who treat you like that, who help you get that familiar feeling of security. But too many people were left to cry in cribs, in wet diapers, lonely, or criticized in their early childhood, or neglected, or even abused. And so they're, babies and small children are still attached, deeply attached, even to the people who hurt them. They love their parents. A toddler will love their parent no matter what. And so what happens is this becomes their model for love, and they go out in their adult romantic lives and they find partners who will treat them the way that's familiar to them, even if it's filled with pain, even if it's filled with longing, even if it's filled with anxiety. And so I personally believe that our attachment style, our psychological attachment style, is sort of the biggest factor in how we choose mates for love. Now, finally, there are social motivators. Finding a partner isn't just about, having an identity as couple or having great sex because you're biologically attracted to each other. It's got to look good on paper, right? And so on dating apps, people put these profiles about where they went to school and what zip code they live in and maybe how much money they make or what their career is, because there is no better way to change your social status than by dating up. All genders want to date up. They want somebody who's out of their league, so to speak. So relationships provide a lot of social mobility. Now, if you're somebody who thinks that's immoral to think like that, this is basic anthropology. The reason why you're here on this planet today is because your ancestors, their blood streams through you, learned how to date up. But the other thing that's social in why we choose mates is that relationships are a bridge between tribes. And children do so much better when they have the most adults with the most interest in their welfare. So that means having family influence or acceptance of who you've chosen. That's why arranged marriages last a whole lot longer than romantic love marriages, because there are so many people involved in that relationship, right? And committed to it. So having social support from two families is very, very important. And that's another social motivator. So biological, psychological, social motivators. I think it's incumbent on all of us to analyze this in ourselves so that we can understand and accept our partners and our choices. And if we're single, make good choices in the future. If we're in a relationship, it'll help us understand how we got here and what we need to do to fix it within the relationship now. All right. When we come back, I would love to take your calls and hear listener love stories. I want to find out how and where you met your mate if it was not on a dating app. I want you to tell me some cute meet story. Maybe you've got one that your parents told you about where they met, because I'm sure your parents met before dating apps existed. I want people to understand that love can be found in the most unusual of places, in the most unusual of ways, because the unconscious is working overtime to get you at a state of readiness for that cute meet. So call in. I think Kayla's going to open up the lines right now over the break. The number is 1-800-520-1534. 1-800-520-1534. If you can't remember it, it's 800-520-1KFI. I'm going to be taking your calls after this. You're listening to the Dr. Wendy Walsh Show on KFI AM 640. We're live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app.